Okay, I think we can start. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Geopolitics and Strategy Society at Warsaw School of Economics, I'm truly delighted to welcome you all to this special event. Today we have the great honor of hosting Professor Patrick Mendis, a Sri Lanka-born American diplomat, scholar, and senior advisor on national security education at the U.S. Department of Defense. It is the appointment by the Biden White House. He is currently distinguished visiting professor of transatlantic relations in University of Warsaw. Professor Mendis has served under both Democratic and Republican administrations from President Reagan to the present, and held key positions at the U.S. Department of State, NATO, and UNESCO. He's also the author of more than 300 publications and has visited over 150 countries. We are truly privileged to welcome such a distinguished guest whose career bridges diplomacy, academia, and global leadership. Today's talk, the geostrategy of Sri Lanka and its new foreign policy in Sino-American and Euro relations. We'll explore Sri Lanka's role in the Indian Ocean, the dynamics of the US-China rivalry, and the evolving role of Europe in Indo-Pacific. The event will follow 3 parts. First, Professor Mendis will share his lecture. Then we'll move to a moderated discussion, and finally open the floor for your questions from the audience. So the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for that, your kind introduction, and also thank you for inviting me. And also want to give special thanks to my dear friend, Iraq, from my own university, a friend and a colleague from the University of Warsaw. Thank you, Iraq, for coming, and thank you for coming. So today, you probably heard about the news. Sri Lanka is on the news today because of the torpedoed Iranian ship. The rescue operation is second ship was just landed in Sri Lanka, and they were rescued by the Sri Lankan Navy and the Air Force. And that also shows us how much we are connected from the Indian Ocean to Middle East and also to the Europe. So I am going to talk about how a small island nation in the Indian Ocean, how it is connected to the world, why Sri Lanka is a key country in the Indian Ocean. It is not only happening just what happened last few days in the Sri Lanka in the news between this Iranian conflict in the Middle East, but it has a long history. So what I would like to talk to you is the importance of Sri Lanka and the new government, new policies, how they are also playing out in the rivalry between China and the US, and also with the India. So as you may know, that a ship, Iranian ship, is returning from India on the way back home to Iran, and that's where they was torpedoed by the American missiles. So in that background, let me talk about the Grand Central Station of the Indian Ocean. When you say the Grand Central Station, you always thinking about, they're talking about New York City or London. Everybody come and go, and it is the center of the people meet. So in the same way, historically speaking, I thought, because of the Sri Lanka's connections to the east and to the west, Sri Lanka itself is a Grand Central Station, Indian Ocean. Now you can see this conflict. Now everybody is focusing on Sri Lanka in addition to the Middle East. So how does the Sri Lanka, the government is going to deal with their new policies and with the new government? So with that background, let me talk about Sri Lanka's history and the future and the rivalry, and also what kind of role that Sri Lanka can play given its history and the linkages to China and also to the United States. And again, before I continue this one, I am speaking over here to you as my individual capacity. It does not reflect my affiliation or connection to any governments, whether it is Sri Lanka or India or China or anything, or any institution. I speak my personal capacity as a scholar here in Poland. So Sri Lanka is very uniquely positioned. This was actually first mentioned by the Sir Arthur C. Clarke, the inventor of the satellite communication, who was a British, but he lived in Sri Lanka for many years since 1953 until his death. So Arthur C. Clarke, who also wrote a foreword to one of my books, and told me this story about Sri Lanka is located in the low pressure zone, because he's a futurist, he's a visionary and a science fiction writer. And when he said that one, much later, the NASA space pictures show this gravity recovered from the climate experimental or GRACE mission to the space by the NASA. And I thought what we knew, whether it is mythological or whether it's a historical, Sri Lanka has the unique gravitas, naturally is there. Other place is in Antarctic. And Sri Lanka is very important in this respect because it is in the center of the Indian Ocean. The low gravity means the aircraft and the ocean ships going back and forth in that region, they have a much higher efficiency in their fuel efficiency. So this is also mythological into Sri Lankan context. There are talks about Ravana and Sita. There is the airplane came in the BC and a long time ago. And this was mythological stories to this one. Now there are some scientific evidence provides there is a low gravity force in nature is already around Sri Lanka and the Indian Ocean. So given that natural gravitas in Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka is not an island in my view. It is connected by the ocean. Connected by the ocean, this little island is connected to the east, and this is to the Middle Kingdom, which now we know as People's Republic of China, PRC. And this goes back to 200 BC. We have Sri Lanka has a diplomatic and commercial and Buddhist relations all these years. Even the Sri Lankan records, 2,500 years of records, provide this kind of diplomatic engagement with mainland China. And on the other hand, Sri Lanka also have a diplomatic relationship with the West European or Roman Empire. It was also recorded. And during this connection, Sri Lanka, in fact, at the very beginning, 2,500 years, is a grand central station in the Indian Ocean that connect by the ocean. This, in fact, is very critically important for Sri Lanka's future and to understand the current situation, what is happening here. And in the ancient maritime trade and diplomatic routes is taken place between Alexandria, which is currently in Egypt, is a Roman Empire at that time, and also to the China, which is in the Han dynasty in China. So for 500 years, these diplomatic relations between the both sides in the Europe and Asia continued and is still continuing. And you may also find Anuradhapura cross, which is, it says, Sri Lanka has Christianity long before Portuguese came in 1500. This is in the 4th century. There are excavation found that Anuradhapura cross, which now is also the symbol of the Catholic Bishop Conference of Sri Lanka. So there, this symbol also repeats that Sri Lanka has connections to the Roman Empire even in the 4th century. And then Second capital of Sri Lanka is not Anuradhapura, it's Polonnaruwa, where I was born. It is also considered to be one of the UNESCO heritage site. It's in the triangle, which is Anuradhapura and Polonnaruwa. The last one is in Kandy. So given this, Sri Lanka's King Parakambahu in the 12th century also export rice to China and bring in silk back to Sri Lanka. This was in the 12th century. And even it says, Sri Lankan Chronicle and also the Chinese document says that King Parakambahu also hired the Chinese soldiers to protect their ships that going through the Bay of Bengal to China. So you can see there was a time, and it still is, Sri Lanka is connected to the west and to the east. And it is collectively, it is the culture. Essentially, culture can be defined as the language, race, and ethnicity, and also the religion. So culture as a collectively is also rely on this grand central station idea that which I mentioned, is into the geography, history, and diplomatic relation. They stay on this tripod of Sri Lanka being a nation that connect the east and the west. So given this one, Sri Lanka has a destiny, its own destiny, which you cannot separate it out from the history. It is still continuing. And one is the Buddhist kingdom of the Lion. In the 4th century, Faxian is a Buddhist monk, came from Xi'an, the ancient capital of China, all the way from to the west and through the India and to Sri Lanka. Then he spent 2 years, 411 to 413 in post-Christian era in the first capital of Sri Lanka. That's there, that influence also felt the Chinese history. And during the Ming dynasty, also there is another Chinese monk wanted to come to Sri Lanka to learn about Buddhism, and Xuan Zan, he is the one who called it in the Buddhist kingdom of the Lion. So this history is critically important to understand why Sri Lanka behaves in the way it behaves even today. And that is also the Sri Lanka Buddhist country. And Buddhism was born in India, but it never survived. Emperor Asoka's time, and his son and daughter came to Sri Lanka and carried Buddhism, and Sri Lanka happened to be the depository of Buddhist knowledge. And that is why the Chinese monks even wanted to come and study the true nature of the Buddhism, which is called the Theravada tradition. They came to this Abhayagiriya Dagaba, and there are other orders of the Buddhist teaching were there. And from there, then Sri Lanka happened to be the depository of the knowledge of Buddhism. Not India, but Sri Lanka. It prevails there. So Buddhist knowledge also influenced the way Sri Lankans behavior. Their kindness, compassion. This also reflects when these ships were torpedoed by the Indian missiles. Sri Lanka has an obligation to show the kindness to the vulnerable people, all the sailors, and then they were taken to the Sri Lankan hospitals, and then the second ship came into Sri Lankan shores yesterday. So you can see this Buddhist compassion, kindness to other people, no matter who they are. This is the humanity is now with the forefront of the Sri Lanka's foreign policy. So now this ancient model of Sri Lanka's Buddhist culture is also the model of Sri Lanka's economic development until the colonial powers arrived. One is lie on a tripod of Sri Lanka. On the top of Sri Lanka is again Buddhism. And Sri Lanka also have over 100 flowing rivers. And this river civilization is also, you can see in the Mohenjo-daro, Harappa in modern-day Pakistan, or the Euphrates-Tigris river civilization in Iraq, or the Nile civilization in Egypt. So Sri Lanka similarly had it, this is a river civilization. Not only they just a river, but they also make reservoirs, artificial lakes. And from that artificial lakes, they control the water and discharge them into the rice field. So then these reservoirs connected to the Buddhist temple, the teaching, the mind is the forerunner of everything. Mind has to be clean, and then they have to have a sustainability. And then there is a rice field was created through the Sri Lankan ancient kingdoms. And that's what I call the hydraulic civilization. And this was also inspired some Chinese hydraulic civilization in China as well. I visited a couple of the places in China when I was teaching there. And I was fascinated to learn from the Chinese scholars. They were inspired by the Sri Lanka's hydraulic civilization. So given this one, this ancient civilization has given the Sri Lanka is a Buddhist-inspired, culturally inspired country. In fact, the Polish tourists find the Sri Lanka is one of the destinations, not only the beaches, but also the history. Okay, and you can imagine that you had no country for 123 years. It's controlled by the Persian Empire or the Russian or the Austrian. But Sri Lanka has remained in continuous civilization. Okay, and given this, you can see the Anuradhapura, first capital at the top, and the second one is Polonnaruwa. That's where I was born. And then also the Kandy. This is the triangle is called the UNESCO triangle. Okay, and given this one, this entire civilization was changed when the Portuguese came to Sri Lanka. And 1505, and then from there, more or less 150 years, they were ruling Sri Lanka's coastal region. Then came the Dutch, and then came the British. So now you can see the entire system is changing from the self-sufficiency rice paddy cultivation to the export-oriented plantation, tea plantation. In fact, and Polish people like tea. And you can see that I learned from my wife, everybody over here in Polish people drink tea for a long time. And because they are coming from Sri Lanka, not only because that reason, but Polish people, not only the Polish, but the British also has a tea culture. And also the other countries in the Middle East, just like I can tell you that Iran and Sri Lanka has a tea oil barter system, even now. Okay, Iran export gasoline and also import tea, because the tea plantation is still part of the Sri Lanka's traditional export economy, is still prevail. And then there is post-colonialism. When Sri Lanka got independent from the Great Britain in 1948, even up to now, there is a political orientation whether you want to have connected with China or with the West or the Americans. So given that one, when we got independent, the first woman prime minister in the world, this is before Margaret Thatcher, long before Golda Meir of Israel, long before Indira Gandhi, there was a woman prime minister in the world, came from Sri Lanka, Mrs. Bandaranaike. Okay, you probably know that name during your communism in the Poland, and that name was very familiar to the non-aligned movement countries. So that time, Mrs. Bandaranaike and Chu and Lai signed this agreement called the tea rubber barter system again. Sri Lanka exports rubber, and matter of fact, now they are importing rice that we used to, in a pre-colonial time, export to China. That entire system was changed from rice cultivation to tea cultivation and rubber and coconut because of the export orientation that Sri Lanka's indigenous rice culture was destroyed. Now we have to import rice from China that we used to export during the King Parakambao's time in the 12th century. So you can see the power of the colonialism that happened, that transformed the economy Sri Lanka. And then given that one, this post-colonialism to 1977, new government came in, they are very pro-American. This is President J.R. Jayawardena went to the White House and donated an elephant to President Ronald Reagan. You know, President Ronald Reagan, being a Republican, is a national symbol. So they wanted to have an elephant, and Sri Lanka's national symbol at that time of the governing party was elephant. So this was donated at the White House, this ceremony. Not because of that one, Sri Lanka also have connections to Henry Olcott, who was the American Civil War hero who was embraced the Buddhism and part of the Buddhist revival in Sri Lanka in the 19th century. And he came from after the Civil War in America and came to Sri Lanka and became a Buddhist. And he revived the Buddhist order and a Buddhist system, and he built more than 100 Buddhist schools by an American. So you can see that the major schools in Colombo, Ananda, Nalanda, and other one, Dharmasoka, those are built by Colonel Henry Olcott. You can see that Sri Lanka is moving from China to the American. This is a swing, because Sri Lanka is very critical, important to the American foreign policy even now, and also the Chinese foreign policy. And legacy is there, history is there. Now, after this whole time, Sri Lanka was pretty much dominated by two political parties. One is the Sri Lankan Freedom Party, that Mrs. Bandaranaike, we talk about it, and her husband who was assassinated, he's an Oxford graduate, and then came up the Jayawardena family, and they pretty much ruled the country. Now the first time in Sri Lankan history, the major two political families in Colombo is no longer are the rulers of Sri Lanka. For the first time, there is a national interest, not the family interest, came into forefront of the Sri Lankan political discourse. Here, Sri Lanka, as a historically, is a Buddhist country and a Sinhala country, but they also have a Christian and Muslim and a Tamil people who traditionally came from northern India, and then British brought into the plantation agriculture in Sri Lanka. But first time in Sri Lankan history, all these people, without a religious, ethnic, and language barriers, they all voted for the one party. They are not the family oriented, because they use this, the ethnicity and the nationalism, in order to gain the power. For the first time in 2024, new government came in under young leader from Anuradhapura, which is the first capital of Sri Lanka. So I came from the second capital of Sri Lanka, and he came from the first capital of Sri Lanka. But the previous rulers from the colonial time, they all came from pretty much from the Colombo. For the first time, new leader came in. He was voted by the all Muslim, Tamil, and Hindu people, all the nationalities. For the first time, Sri Lanka has a national interest at the forefront of the island. So this one I call the anthropogenic foreign policy. It is not driven by the family interest that would happen in the Rajapaksa's time and other previous political parties. There is the family orientation was there. Now there is it beyond the first time that the Sinhala Muslim and Hindu people, or the Christian religious faith, and the Muslim and Hindus, they all pretty much voted for this young leader. And from there, he used the history. He was very sensitive to the Buddhism and the commerce and diplomatic relation that Sri Lanka had in the past, because he knows the past is the future. The past is a prologue, like Shakespeare said. So he is originally pro-Marxist and leftist side, but his action and foreign policy and also centrist and neutral, and is embedded into the Sri Lanka's culture and the history. And there is no national political orientation or national ethnic orientation or the lingual orientation and the religious orientation. This is the first time anthropogenic foreign policy emerged in Sri Lanka. So then there is pragmatism. This new leader, beyond the traditional orientation from the Marxism and to coming into the realism. They really understand that when the world changes, Sri Lanka has to change. And all ideas has to be changing. That exactly happened when Mao Zedong passed away. Deng Xiaoping came in. New foreign policy, no pragmatism came in. And China went to a different orientation in the pro-market, Western-oriented system, but still keeping their Chinese culture, which I'm going to talk to you in a minute. So then there is a vision. The vision is a national interest, not the family interest, not the one political party interest, but this is the first time there is a national interest and also thinking about the sovereignty of the island. That is where these political changes are critically important. So for the first time, then Sri Lanka is taking a new course. That is why we need to watch the current government, how they engage in the West and the East in a neutral way, but the Buddhism that at the core of the current situation that you see, when the torpedoes naval ships was attacked and the sailors were treated in the Sri Lankan hospitals. And then he talked about we need to provide the compassionate. This is originating from the Buddhism, the humanity as the forefront of the anthropologist's foreign policy. So that is going to be the shining example to other countries as well. I will tell you why. Because this is the foreign policy motto: friendship with all, enmity with none. This is the Janata Vimukti Peramuna, JVP, or NPP, National People's Power, foreign policy principle. It is embedded into the Sri Lankan culture, Buddhist ethos, and also the vision for the country and to the world. And it essentially sending a message to the world, what kind of foreign policy, what we need to have if you want to keep the humanity intact and have a progress for the humanity. So this foreign policy, integrated and balanced engagement with the world, is this new? No, it is not a Sri Lankan invention. This has been the humanistic orientation that can be seen in other countries as well. I will come to that one, talking about one of the greatest civilization in the South Asia is India. India's foreign policy is neighborhood first. And it has an engagement in the East and the West under current Modi administration. But there are some always have a distinction between and among countries, but it's pretty much it's talking about its nationalistic orientation of their culture. And then they are coming from the China. China is, they have a BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, that goes from the Sri Lanka. That is the epicenter or the jewel, crown jewel of BRI in the Indian Ocean. And then there is the United States. What is their foreign policy? Their foreign policy, free and open navigation. This triangulated major powers in the region, Sri Lanka in the middle of it. A small country, but it has a long, enduring history and a culture that is still thriving. So given that one, not only Sri Lanka is constrained by that one, it has a diplomatic relationship with the West. Few days ago, Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka, he was in Romania and also in Germany. And following day, he went to Sri Lanka when that torpedo accident happened in the south of Sri Lankan waters. So he was also engaging with the European countries and also the United Kingdom and the Canada and also the Russians. Sri Lanka has a good relationship with Russia as well. And then you have a good relationship with Japan and South Korea because they are the primary investors, and diplomatic and commercial relationship between these two countries are very prominent after China. And then you have Australia and New Zealand, and then you have Middle Eastern countries, Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So essentially, Sri Lanka is friendship with all, enmity for none. Because in essence, at the end of the day, we are all human. We are neither American, Chinese, Japanese, Hindus, and Russian. At the end of the day, we are human. That was the Buddhist message was. Buddhism talk about get rid of the suffering. That is a Buddhist teaching. Liberation comes from the getting rid of the suffering. That also applied to the Sri Lankan foreign policy. This founding principle is also the US foreign policy. Trade with all, entangle with none. This foreign policy was at the very beginning of the founding of the United States. There are two founding fathers which is very important. Alexander Hamilton, he was the first Secretary of the Treasury of George Washington administration. And his arch enemy was the Thomas Jefferson, his Secretary of State. They were intellectual. They are soaked with the Renaissance ideas, enlightenment of Europe. They read, unlike some other leaders what we have in Washington. They knew the history of America. They knew the history of the world. They knew the agony and persecution of other countries in the European prior to the Enlightenments. So these founding fathers engaged in the history, and they wanted to create a new country. United States was the first country ever being created. Other countries are civilization emerged. So this is the country, first time is created by the enlightened founding fathers. And their foreign policy is trade for peace, which I wrote this book about survey of how these founding fathers, this idea come together, connecting all the original 13 colonies into what we call the United States of America, and going to the westward. Why Thomas Jefferson, when he was the third president, wanted to buy the Louisiana Purchase from the Napoleon Bonaparte from France, and went to the westward because they wanted to connect the United States with China. So given this one, trade with all, entangle with none, with the United States foreign policy, which is similar to what Sri Lanka is pursuing right now. Friendship with all and enmity of none. So this one, Thomas Jefferson said, the third president, peace, commerce, honest friendship with all nations, entangle alliance with none. If we wanted to listen to the wisdom of the founding fathers, we wouldn't have this conflict today, am I right? This is the Enlightenment ideas of America's moral foundation. that everybody around the world inspired to. It was the shining city on the hill. Everybody looked to America for the inspiration because of that founding vision. And at the same time, where this founding vision was influenced by the Chinese at the very beginning. Founding fathers found the inspiration from the Chinese culture and its history, because it has more than 5,000 years of ancient history, and they had the Silk Road connecting to all the way to the Europe, and founding fathers want to find why the China was the most successful before British or the European colonial powers came in. So given this one, Sri Lanka and the Indian Ocean, what China call it the Western Ocean. Why is it the Western Ocean? Because in the Chinese literature and their poetry, they talk about the Indian Ocean as the Western Ocean. They have a East China Sea, South China Sea, and the North China Sea is the imaginary China Sea, and then also the Western Ocean. So that is because of the historical and psychological makeup of how Chinese think about their national identity, because they are the center of the world, they are the Middle Kingdom. So now Admiral Chung He came to Sri Lanka during the Ming Dynasty. And when he came to Sri Lanka, he put it 1409, this gold trilingual tablet. It was written in 3 languages, Persian, Tamil, and Chinese. It says, a peaceful world built on trade. Remember, this is pretty much more than 500 years ago. America did not exist that time. It is, we are celebrating 250 years this year. This is the ancient cultures. That's why the American founding fathers was inspired by this. Because they have the history, they have the practical aspect of the Chinese foreign policy, and this 7 treasure ships by the Ming Dynasty was to build a peaceful world through trade. That was their mission. Not to conquer, but to trade with them. And now that idea is coming to play under President Xi Jinping. His idea of the BRI in the northern route, which is called the ancient Silk Road, is the representation of the Tang Dynasty, starting from Xi'an, where I first started to teach long time ago. And then there is in the Ming Dynasty, Ming Emperor Zhongel sent his treasure ship to the Indian Ocean. Now, under President Xi Jinping, it is a reflect of that ancient culture, ancient history is the forefront. And why? Because they think history and the culture is the destiny. The past is the prologue, coming back to the Shakespearean ideas. So given this one, Sri Lanka is the crown jewel of China's strategy, BRI. And this is pretty much the shared vision. You cannot tell America's original ideas and China's emerging ancient ideas are different. No, they thought in order to bring people together, it is not the language. If it is the language, America would not go to war with his mother country of Great Britain. When the British came and the second time they burned the White House in 1812, language did not bring the peace. And the ethnicity would not bring the peace. You can see this in the Ukraine war, the ethnic identity. And the language and also the religion. There is no history talks about religion bring peace. They are even have a conflict, whether it is a Christian and Muslim, Hindus and Muslims, everywhere. So, but they thought enlightened ideas of the American founding fathers thought trade bring peace, among other factors. So that is why the trade is the middle of the conversation. So founding fathers wanted to have the Sino-American commercial civilization. They sent the first ship to America, from America on George Washington's birthday, 1784, from New York to Guangzhou, which is earlier they called Canton. They didn't send the first ship to the European countries because they didn't like the European powers. They want to have a commerce with China. They will send all the way through transatlantic and the Indian Ocean and also to China, the ships. The first ship called the Empress of China. And United States export ginseng and import tea and silk. And that created the tea culture in the eastern coastal region of the United States, original 13 colonies. So pretty much they wanted to have China and America together, Sino-America, which I call Chimerican civilization, China and American civilization. That was the original idea of the founding fathers. To create a world, you need to bring peace, peace through trade. Now, US foreign policy is peace through strength. This is an antidote to the American founding vision, actually. You have to have a peace through justice if you want to listen to the American stories. Peace through justice. Then Martin Luther King Jr. will talk about that. Not a peace through strength. This was the medieval idea. Who has the power and the rest of things subject to that power. Now what we need is a peace through trade. That's the founding vision, not the peace through strength. This is a very myopic. So that is why you need to know the history if you want to see the better future for the humanity. That is the American ideas. And ultimately, this Chimerican idea, China and America together, is now combined with the little island that has an ancient culture, history, very marinated with the Buddhist thoughts, compassion with all. That was the foreign policy, friendship with all, enmity for none, which is pretty much the trade with all, entangled with none foreign policy, or the BRI, Chinese foreign policy. They go to the other countries not to looking for the monsters, but to be the shining example to the world. It was said by the John Quincy Adams, the later president and also the Secretary of State. So America should not go abroad to look for the monsters, but America should be the shining example to its conviction, the founding conviction. That conviction is now carried out by little island in the Indian Ocean, which is shared by the one ancient civilization, Chinese, and the first democratic country or republic created by the founding fathers who were soaked into the Enlightenment ideas of the European wisdom. So that is what I think is the remarkable for Sri Lanka, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor, for this fascinating and insightful lecture. Let's now move into the short conversation to expand on some of the topics you mentioned and also learn a bit more about your extraordinary career and experiences. from diplomatic service to teaching and advising at the highest level of governments. I would like to ask a few questions about those experiences. So, the first question, was there a particular diplomatic moment or event in your career that profoundly influenced how you understand the global system?
It's an excellent question. Let me reflect on it. When I went to America as an exchange student, 1970s, on a scholarship, I went to high school there. And later on, I returned after my first degree in Sri Lanka, and I was pretty much adopted by the Minnesotan. So there, I had one of most important person in my life was Honorable Edward Burdick, who was the longest served public servant in the nation. He worked in the Minnesota legislature. He was initially my boss. And he told me, if you want to be a real American, you should not be Democrat or Republican, but you should be bipartisan. It's just like the American eagle. You need to have right wings and the left wings to soar. That is why American founding fathers used the eagle, American eagle, to fly, because you need to have a both side, Democratic and Republican. Because we are in a world, we have our own ideologies. But we need to argue, debate, and find what is best. Then is come the ancient Greek and Roman ideas of the Socrates to the Aristotle and Plato. Argue, find the rationale, not the ideology, but the rationale for the human progress. So that is why we need to have a Democrat and a Republicans. So throughout my life, when I went to work for the government, starting with President Ronald Reagan, and then afterward other presidents. So I serve in the both Democratic and Republican side. I represent the United States at the United Nations, and I spoke very highly about America because it's inspired me first to come to America and to serve in the government. And my American father taught me, because he served in the Minnesota legislature since the Franklin D. Roosevelt time onward until he passed away after 67 years of public service. So he told me that you have to be an eagle, work with the Republican and the Democrats, then you become real American. So that idea is installed in my entire public service career and diplomacy. So to answer your question, everywhere I went, whether it's teaching in 27 Chinese universities or even Poland at my university here, Warsaw, and also my taught at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. So my idea is we need to have an argument and debate to that's what the academic institution is supposed to do. Develop, you expand your mind. You are trained to be a diplomat. You know, ideology, whether it is a religious, ethnic, or any other orientation, would not help to sustain or the promote or the progress for the humanity. So that is coming from that Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates are talking about. You need to have this rational thinking, rational argument between everybody. So for me, being an American, pretty much trace in that culture, serving for the American people is the most important part. Whether it is a Democrat or Republican is a secondary. So for me, and always being a Sri Lankan, born in that culture, embedded me in that Buddhist DNA in my life. I always wanted to look at you as a human being. The Polish part is secondary. You are a friend, and you are a brother and sister. So that is more important to me, whether I am a diplomat or the working for the chair in the interagency government, work in the US government. So that is my common theme, that first, of course, you are an American and by identity, but also that the Buddhist DNA in you is also go along with it. So that is why I try to explain to you that Sri Lanka has similar kind of themes that the American foreign policy or the Chinese foreign policy, the principle that advocate. So Sri Lanka is following that kind of theme, the humanity side of it. That also illustrious in a recent act last few days by the Sri Lankan president.
Thank you very much for that. You actually answered my second question. So proceeding further, finally, as someone who bridges policy making and academia, what would you give to younger people in Europe and Poland especially, who aspire to work in diplomacy, strategy or international organization?
What is the last part?
Strategy or international organization.
Strategies for international organization?
Who aspire to work in diplomacy, strategy or international organization.
Okay. This is where I think you guys are the future. Don't look to us because the older generation, even though I consider myself young, but what I'm trying to tell you is you are coming from the different generation. Why? Because you are not carrying a lot of baggages, your identity, your national identity, your religious identity, your language identity. These are important for your own identity. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you are Ukrainian, Russian, or the French or German. But of course you are Polish. But at the same time, Polish culture created so many innovation and contribution to the progress of humanity. Whether it is a mathematician or Marie Curie or Chopin and all those kind of things to the culture and your literature, your music. It didn't matter the people in China like your music, right? And it doesn't matter whether Marie Curie was a Polish or not, because she created the greater things for the humanity. So my thinking is to go beyond. You are neither Polish, nor Russian, nor anything, but at the end of the day, everybody is brothers and sisters. If you can think, young generation can think about whether you are negotiating with enemies, you always need to think about is that person like me? We've always wanted to have the same aspiration. So I tell you another example. I was negotiating with the Chinese in the UN one time. The lady, they are the Chinese delegation, we had the evening cocktail party in the delegates lounge and the UN. And she found out that I had a great interest in the Chinese culture. And she never asked me whether you are American or the Indian or anything. We just I talk about the Xi'an and Sri Lanka's culture and everything. So we became good friends. In the following morning, we were in the opposite side. She has the Chinese flag and I had the American flag. At that point, I can see her face completely turn red. Previous night, we were all friends. And the following day, we are negotiating with the Arcturus Convention about data privacy issues and other things in the European Union, and it was very controversial. So at that point, our friendship kind of disappeared because she thought that the friend that he had the connection previous night is under the American flag. So my thinking is we need to go beyond that nationalities, and we always have differences. Husband and wife always have differences, girlfriend and boyfriend. You know, sometimes wife asks you, I want to go to the McDonald's, my wife likes, and I go to KFC. So should we go separately to places? Sometimes we do. We buy them there and come to the car and eat there. Sometimes I go with her and eat hamburgers, and she come to the KFC. We are always different. Whether you are a friendship or your relationship and your family, husband and mother, father, and they are different, and your relationship. We are always different. How can we extend that differences? We also have a commonality. And in the diplomatic side, whether it is a Chinese and American negotiating, we have to have the common vision. For the young generation who are inspired to be the public servant or the diplomat, what I said is learn from the history. Don't think your nationalities or religious orientation is going to define you. Defined by what humanity is, what the founding fathers of America thought, and why the Chinese are going to ancient Silk Road to seek the knowledge from Sri Lanka. Admiral Chung Ho come in and to have a peaceful trade relations. And America wanted to have an open and free navigation. The principles are there. We wanted to reflect on it and think about at the very end of the day, you wanted to have you have to live progress for the humanity. Not the progress for your country, because you are go beyond your Polish nationalism, the Polish contribution to the world, go beyond Poland. And I want you to be that person when you become a diplomat. Go beyond Poland, because Marquis or Chopin and other leaders and mathematicians I learned about in Poland provided a lot of great things. And first kerosene oil and oil tanker in Krosno is by the Polish. They didn't think about that technology is used by the Middle East, but it was found in Krosno, where I went to visit. So that's what I want you to be. Go beyond Polishness. You be the instrument for the human progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question we'd like to ask is about Sri Lanka's strategic environment. In your view, what are the key lessons that smaller states can learn from Sri Lanka's experience in engaging competing powers?
Competing powers, yes. As I mentioned in my presentation, in the past, the colonial relics was they created a certain elitist group in the capitals, wherever the British went. They created certain groups for instruments for their British colonial needs back in London. So Sri Lanka has created a certain colonial families who were educated in Great Britain, and they learned English. And then when they came back to Sri Lanka, they wanted to have a Sinhala as a national language. But they were educated in English. But don't become instruments of colonial powers. We are always subjected to it. So the Sri Lankan new government, the current president, Anur Dissanayake, and all the leadership in the Sri Lankan parliament, they were educated in Sri Lanka. Some of them are, of course, trained in other countries, especially in Japan. But they understand Sri Lanka better than the families that were educated in Great Britain for the needs of the colonial rulers. That mindset from the families created that continuation of the colonial rules. It is a psychological effect, colonial mentality. On the new government, their strategic thinking. We don't need to have language or the religion or the ethnicity to the instruments of the colonial powers. They are now indigenous leadership. That Sri Lanka, for the first time, belonged to Sri Lankan people. That's what represents this government. So they are young, not much experience. Experience they can learn. I always said experience does not really matter. What matters is the attitude, not the experience, the attitude. Yuri Gagarin went to space. He didn't have any experience, am I right? But he has the attitude to get there. Neil Armstrong never walked on the moon, but he has the attitude, go to the moon. Sri Lankan leaders don't need to have that kind of attitude, as long as they have an attitude to learn and to relearn and unlearn. So that is where that Socrates and Aristotle and Plato, these ideas coming in. You need to have a change your mind, which is essentially the Buddhist philosophy. In the Buddhist philosophy, they call the Mano Bubbangama Dhamma Manosetta Manomaya in Pali, which says mind is the forerunner of everything. If you develop the mind, the attitude, you can get there. Experience comes later. So foreign policy-wise, how to deal with these competing powers with the Chinese or the Americans, whether you want to align with them, but if you want to align with them, what is the sovereignty or the country's self-identity, what would that happen? Whether you want to continue this legacy that Sri Lanka has 2,500 years of recorded history, you want to look that one and look future. You remember that the Winston Churchill once said, if you want to know the farthest, the future, it depends on the farthest backward you can look. Okay, that means what Shakespeare said, past is a prologue. So I think Sri Lankan leaders for the first time, they get rid of the shackle of their mentality of the colonial mindset. You need to be educated in Oxford or Cambridge or Sorbonne. That's some of our leaders were educated. For the first time, Sri Lankan leadership was a product of the Sri Lankan universities, but they do understand the history. So that's why I think the current leadership is the fresh start. It's a new beginning. It's the leadership that embedded into the Sri Lankan culture, and they understand the geopolitics, and at the same time, they are looking at the progress of humanity. Whether it's Iranian sailors dying in the Sri Lankan waters, what the Sri Lanka should do? Rescue them for the first thing. Do no harm. So that's kind of foreign policy, I think, is the example to the world. Okay, when there is a killing machine coming in, now there is hospitals are full of empathy and compassion, and those are the human qualities that we need to develop when we are dealing with the competing powers, because you don't want to be like them. You wanted to reason, and you wanted to look at the instrument of the human progress.
And let's turn now to the broader picture, the role of the European Union and transatlantic cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. This is going to be the last question. From a transatlantic perspective, what kind of contribution could middle powers like Poland or other EU states make to the region's security and economic connectivity?
Excellent question. You know, my wife and I were talking about it, and Poland has some relationship with Sri Lanka, not because your current foreign minister, Srivoksky, went to Sri Lanka late last year, but long before that one. What is the two Polish sociologists and anthropologists? Malinowski and Witaski. They went to Sri Lanka. And they have a remarkable legacy. They talk about the places they visited, but it's fascinating. Actually, Witaski from the college, am I right? The other, Adam Asnik, yes. Adam Asnik from college, that's my wife's place of birth, which is one of the ancient and historic city in Poland. So what would the Polish people and the middle power can do in the European countries? Actually, this is already is taking place to tourism. Tourism is just like intellectual exchange. They come to Sri Lanka, learn to appreciate it, you know. And I happened to meet my wife in, we were exchange scholars or the fellows of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Taiwan. So we met there. Education and tourism, these are the exchange of ideas, exchange of views. You also change your mindset when you go to Sri Lanka. Oh, like Buddhist temple everywhere. When I come to over here, oh, the Catholic churches all over. There's a spiritual element to it, the human being. So you begin to kind of in a subconsciously learn about whether you are a tourist or even an academic, whether you have a transatlantic relationship. My friend is working on some Anglo-Saphir kind of relationship between the European countries and also in the Americans. So that way we not only exchanging ideas, trading ideas, we are also changing our mindset. We are no longer Polish, no longer Sri Lankan, or no longer Americans. We become what we call the interbeing. We are connected by two forces or many forces. So you develop in that kind of mindset. So for the middle powers countries like Poland, I think you are not going to be a middle powers anymore. You are already surpassed Japan in the GDP, and pretty soon the United Kingdom in a couple of years from time. So you are going to be a major key players in Europe. Not, I wouldn't call it Eastern Europe, the entire Europe. I think Poland has a greater role, increasingly greater role, and you, as the young generation, have a play in the years to come. So therefore, I think your country's increasing number of tourists to Sri Lanka is a very, very positive sign. And we used to have a direct flights before COVID from Warsaw and Colombo, and also the exchange programs with the University of Warsaw and Colombo University. So after COVID is kind of temporarily stopped. Now they are kind of reconnected, but the tourism is still continuing between Polish nationals. When you go to Sri Lanka at the airport, I always tease my wife, did you hear they are Polish? And she look at it, how do you know? Because they say tak, tak, tak all the time, you know, because I don't speak Polish, but I know a few words here and there. So therefore, I think you have a great place in the coming years to play a greater role, not only in middle country, but it's a key player, Poland. And I always tell my Polish student, don't underestimate the importance of Poland. The World War I, World War II, even now, all went through Poland. And you are the first country that helped Americans to go into Afghanistan. And Poland has played a great role in the past, and I think continually, increasingly going to be playing a greater role, and you are going to be the forefront of that enterprise that make Poland great again.
Thank you very much for the insight, Professor. We currently run out of the time, so we're going to ask one question to the audience.
All right. Any questions? Okay. Oh.
Hello, thank you for coming. In recent years, there's been an idea in Europe, and to a certain extent in America, to de-risk from China, to reduce certain perceived dangerous dependence on China. And certain countries have come in to fill in the vacuum. So, for example, Bloomberg has called them the key connector countries. And, for example, Poland is one of the Turkey, Indonesia, Morocco, and one more country, Vietnam.
Okay.
And so, and these countries are, for example, Vietnam is rapidly developing economically. And so, does the new government in Sri Lanka see an opportunity to come in and serve as come in and fill a certain vacuum for Europe in these kind of like de-risking from China, and to a certain extent does does Sri Lankan government see this as an opportunity for its development of this country?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And as you said, at the founding vision of America and the vision of the BRI or the Chinese history, why they went abroad, the Middle Kingdom, whether it is the northern route in the Tang Dynasty, is the epic journey, and also the maritime Silk Road that reflect the Ming Dynasty. And at the same time, the open borders, open and pre-navigational system. If we were to adhere to these principles, as American or the Chinese, entangle with none, trade with the old, very much like the current foreign policy of Sri Lanka, anthropogenic foreign policy, which I call it. It doesn't advocate any ethnic or any religion or any nationalities or anything. That is that at the very end of the day, all these three foreign policies' underlying principle is the progress of humanity. Okay? You can see America is in that respect, it's very unique. It was created for the first time in the world. Anybody from anywhere in the world can go to America, used to be at least. They can be an American. You know, second largest Polish population is near Chicago in Illinois. They're all Americans. My wife and I visited some of your countrymen over there. And there's a Sri Lankan community. And if you look at all the IT sector in America, all are foreign born. Majority of them are not real American. This, in other words, America is in the sense unique. Anywhere from any place in the world can come to America, can be an American. That is the original idea. But you can live in Germany years and years, you never become a German or Russian or the Japanese, but only in America, anywhere from anywhere can come, because that is the philosophy of the founding vision. So having said that one, these countries have a relationship with, mostly it's a trade relationship, whether it is Indonesia or Vietnam. Sri Lanka has always trade relationship, plus Buddhist diplomacy, which I wrote about it, why Buddhism is key component of Sri Lanka's foreign policy. Not only this, the Chinese want to come to Sri Lanka learn Buddhism, but Buddhism was re-exported to India in the Bodhi Gas Society in Varanasi and to other countries. And it also enriched the Sri Lankan Buddhism from Taiwan and Siam and other countries in the Southeast Asia. So we are at the very end of we are trade in ideas, okay? Trade in our philosophies, what the history did, and trade in goods. And when you put the element of military, the pause, when somebody argue peace through strength, it is very, very antithetical to the American founding vision. Trade for peace was the American vision. And then later on, because of the American legacy is such, Martin Luther King said, peaceful through justice. That is an American, very heart of American idea. Of course, that peace through its strength, that idea coming from Ronald Reagan, mainly because of the Cold War period with the Soviet Union and America. So that is why the Star Wars and other things happened during the Reagan years. It is not thought through. That's the another thing I want to conclude to your answer is, when China make decisions, they are very deliberate. They thought through it. Even though you think this is a dictatorial autocratic country, but there is a process going on in China. I can tell you, I was engaged with them, teaching in 27 Chinese universities. I know about a little bit about how their policies are formulated. They are very deliberate. Unlike Washington, right now at least. You make the decision 10 minutes ago and change it following 10 minutes later. And you can see yesterday what happened. I was listening to the congressional hearing of the Secretary of Homeland Security. I was listening to her. And I said to myself, oh my goodness. And 1 hour later, she was fired, but she didn't know she was fired by President Trump. And that kind of thing is not deliberate, thought through it. It is a very reactionary. China responded, America react. There's a huge distinction. So that's why I think we need to return to the American founding vision. They are the one who inspired the world. They are the one looking to America at the signing city on the hill. So that needs to be the American story, should be. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Mendis, on behalf of the Geopolitics and Strategy Society and the entire Warsaw School of Economics, thank you for sharing your time, knowledge and experiences with us today. We greatly appreciate your insight and hope to continue this dialogue in the future. And to everyone in the audience, thank you for joining us today. Please stay connected with the Geopolitics and Strategy Society for the future events and discussions. Thank you very much and have a wonderful afternoon.
Yeah, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you very much.
I hope it's okay.